The moment the Lord of the Sith, Vader, got to confront his former master and Kenobi on the Death Star was a defining one for the Dark Lord. In his mind, he had been preparing for this singular moment, obsessed with his hatred for the Jedi, specifically for Kenobi. As Anakin Skywalker, he should have defeated him on Mustafar, and following this, he finally got the opportunity to correct this wrong. As we explored in a previous video, Vader could feel the surges of the dark side as he dueled Kenobi, the very flow of the Force turning in his favor, as he could feel the dark side of the Force surging within him to strike down the Jedi, and eventually he would. But everything was not as Vader had desired. Kenobi had disappeared into the Force, what Vader would first deem a trick of the Jedi, as his levels of hatred only grew for Kenobi, sensing that the Jedi Master had not taught Anakin Skywalker all that he had promised, that there was something that the Jedi had always kept from him, the Council, his own master, a final insult to Anakin Skywalker, a disgrace to his memory, withholding from the greatest Jedi that had ever lived any secret that would have given him an edge. This fact boiled within the very mind of Vader. But after this, Darth Vader would have a crucial decision to make. After Kenobi had disappeared, many thoughts went through his head, but the Star Wars Legends novel The Death Star is very clear on something. Darth Vader was exceedingly keen to share this information with his master and Palpatine. Ask him exactly how Kenobi managed to disappear into the Force, whether or not this was some archaic knowledge that was developed by Palpatine's own master in Plagueis, or whether or not this truly was a Jedi secret kept from Lord Vader. However, Darth Vader would make a critical decision here, and in both canon and Legends continuity, Palpatine made the explicit decision not to tell his master that Kenobi had disappeared into the Force. So why exactly is this? Well, Star Wars Legends gives us not one, but two answers to this question, and when examining the pages of the Death Star novel, all the way to the Return of the Jedi novelization, Darth Vader has two answers to this question. But one reality, Darth Vader held this back from his master, and did not tell Palpatine of Obi-Wan's true fate. Following Kenobi's death, Darth Vader did something exceptionally interesting. He decided to meditate on the Force itself. In his own thoughts, Kenobi's death had left him with many questions, but one truth. Darth Vader had come to the realization that the Force was far more powerful than he had perceived. In fact, he had grown arrogant in his own powers of the dark side, believing that he had explored the extents of what the Force could offer him, even despite his injuries. But with the passing on of Kenobi through the Force, and with Darth Vader unable to sense him, and yet the body being completely gone following his victory, Darth Vader was left utterly perplexed, and he knew it. At first he wanted to explore the fate of Kenobi with his master, determined that it was some trick of Darth Plagueis that Kenobi had somehow learned. However, Vader ultimately resolved to the fact that if Darth Sidious had not told him the secret of Plagueis nearly 2 decades after Anakin's fall, that these secrets would forever remain with his master. And Vader came to the realization that he had to discover what happened to Obi-Wan on his own. As the Death Star approached Yavin, Vader continued to prod into the Force itself, sensing that Kenobi was still out there somewhere, however not in front of him. He had believed that Kenobi had in fact been defeated though, and this was a thought that the Dark Lord clung to. As Vader sensed in the Force itself, he believed his victory was final, even though Obi-Wan's body had disappeared, and Vader clung to that thought, even though there was no body to prove it. Vader believed this to be a simple trick of the light side. He believed that this was something to rob him of his utter victory, and that Kenobi had always meant to do this. And as Vader continued to focus, he simply told himself that Kenobi was truly gone, and that the fact that there was no body meant little to him. Upon the Death Star, Vader got the sense that this would be a day long remembered, and that it did indeed mark the death of Obi-Wan Kenobi. This shows again truly just how little Vader knew about what had actually happened to Obi-Wan. Darth Vader had fallen under the assumption that Kenobi truly did die, and that his essence did not continue on through the Force itself. To Vader, their rivalry was truly put to dead, and he would no longer be haunted by the memory of the old Jedi. It didn't matter what had happened to Obi-Wan Kenobi's body, Obi-Wan was truly dead. Vader knew that Kenobi would have no impact on the events to come, that the Sith had truly ruled supreme. But there was a part of the Dark Lord that was still somewhat obsessed in the recesses of his mind about what had happened to Obi-Wan. Anakin Skywalker had truly become a Sith Lord at this point in time, and Darth Vader desired to learn this knowledge through a pursuit of power. He wasn't exactly fascinated with why Kenobi had managed to disappear, but more so, how he achieved this. Vader had no such knowledge among the Sith or the Jedi, and in fact the only pieces that he could cling to was the knowledge of Darth Plagueis. He knew that Darth Plagueis could stop himself from dying, but in his mind, he truly believed that Obi-Wan was dead. And although after Kenobi disappeared, Vader's mind immediately went to the legend of Darth Plagueis, it did not stay there long. And when he eventually reported to his own master Insidious, Vader would simply say that Obi-Wan was killed, leaving out the details, because to Vader, they had grown to be inconsequential. Vader was only thinking of the fate of Obi-Wan physically, not spiritually at all, not realizing that Kenobi still existed within the Force itself with his own identity, that he had not truly passed on as Vader believed. Vader simply viewed Kenobi's disappearance as an insult, while we, as audience members, viewed it as far more important. Kenobi had truly become more powerful than Vader could possibly imagine, and this statement rung true. At the time, Vader couldn't imagine anything beyond his own physical death and the power that he could achieve in life, but Kenobi could. Vader had no knowledge of such an ability, but that doesn't mean though that his master didn't. In the Great Sith Wars, there was indeed documentation of Jedi disappearing just moments before death, with this being something that even Darth Plagueis would make notes about. However, Plagueis determined that this was not in fact the eternal life that he had always sought, and instead turned to the manipulation of midichlorians. With it said though, Palpatine and Plagueis were well aware that Jedi could disappear into the Force moments before their death. However, they simply cast this aside because they believed that they had more powerful means to achieve immortality, ones that could keep their bodies alive indefinitely, and they would not have to rely on the Force itself, but rather their own manipulation of the dark side and their own dark experiments to achieve immortality. The reality of the situation is Lord Vader worked through this during his time on the Death Star. At first, he was tormented with the idea that Kenobi could somehow return through the nether realm of the Force and strike down the Sith Lord, finishing the job with some form of archaic knowledge, passed down from Darth Plagueis or not. But by the time the Death Star was destroyed, Vader had come to terms with Kenobi's death, and he had told himself that this was simply a last trick, be it of the mind or of the body. It was inconsequential. Obi-Wan Kenobi was dead, Vader was victorious, and Vader's crippling fear of Kenobi, although it was true in the moment following his disappearance, was not a permanent state of being. Vader worked past this, confident in his own strength in the dark side, and although there was always a part of him that felt this confrontation was left hollow, in his mind, he was victorious. But there is one aspect of the story that I find very important that I need to note. As of right now, there is very little information on why Darth Vader did not explain to his master in Darth Sidious the fate of Kenobi and why he disappeared in Star Wars canon. We simply do know in Star Wars canon that he did not tell his master that Kenobi disappeared. In Star Wars Legends, this is the information that we're provided and the explanation, but in canon, we still don't know exactly why. Which means there is a potential story to be told here. Perhaps Darth Vader looked into it personally following Kenobi's disappearance in the Force. Or maybe the explanation is shared with Star Wars Legends, and he ultimately found this inconsequential and his victory solidified. But canon has not given us an explicit answer. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on how Darth Vader did not tell Palpatine that Obi-Wan Kenobi had disappeared? How he was at first filled with dread at the prospects of Kenobi returning, but how in the end he was able to seek through the dark side, and within his own mind, that his victory was true and definitive. As always, my friends, thank you so much for stopping by the channel today, and may the Force be with you always.